Well, welcome. I'm George Blumenthal. I'm the Chancellor at UC Santa Cruz, and I want to welcome you all to this great event this evening. I see it's an opportunity to rediscover Herman Blake and Don Rothman. You know, I didn't actually know that we'd lost them, but it's going to be a very interesting conversation. Why is UC Santa Cruz such a special place? I think almost everyone in this room would recognize that we are a special place, that we're often different but always relevant. And I think that the reason for that is a couple of things. One is the vision of the founders of this campus. But I think the other reason is the people who turned that vision into a reality, something that could make a difference in the lives of our students. And it's been the commitment of this campus to the undergraduate experience so that UC Santa Cruz students could achieve so very much. Many students who've come here, in fact, couldn't believe that on other campuses, their friends don't get an opportunity to meet their professors one-on-one, or don't get an opportunity to learn how to think rather than what to think about subjects. But that's what we do here, with professors often familiar with their students on a first-name basis. And tonight, it's really my pleasure to have with us two of those visionaries, two people who made that vision a reality. Now, I first met Herman and Don almost 40 years ago. And it was an interesting first impression. First of all, their impression of me, I couldn't even imagine, since I had a beard just about down to my navel and hair almost as long. But I remember walking in to meet Herman for the first time. He was with Ralph Guzman, who was another faculty member who shared with Herman a vision of a multicultural college experience for our students. And Herman walked in wearing his signature black leather jacket. And it took about 5 seconds for me to realize that Herman was a man who had a vision to do something different, and the ability to turn that vision into a reality. And similarly, when I first met Don Rothman, I realized I had met someone very special. Don has, throughout his life, had a commitment to writing and communications. But that's not enough. It's his ability to work well with people in a collegial manner that makes Don so special and able to have accomplished so very much throughout his career. And of course, both of them were crucial to the development of this new college, which became Oaks College. Herman's commitment was always to the students. He wanted to create a college that provided students with a multicultural experience where they could feel safe, where they could feel comfortable, and where they could revel in their differences rather than demand similarity. And Herman made that a reality for so many students. But he didn't just do that. He realized that to thrive in a university setting and in society required more than comfort. It required a commitment to academics. So when I talked to Herman's students who took classes from him, I was always struck by the fact that even though he's a nice guy, he was tough. He would never accept second best. And he also had a commitment to the inclusion of science in students' education. He realized that we live in an increasingly technological society, and that for our students to thrive and achieve dreams, many of them were going to have to become scientists and engineers in order to really make it in this world and populate the broad segments of society. In Don's case, in the case of Don Rothman, he had a lifelong commitment to writing, as I mentioned before, but his leadership of the California Writing Project, as well as his commitment to Oaks College, has made a huge difference in the lives of students, not just at Santa Cruz, but throughout the state. And the other thing that I would say about them both is that I, as a young faculty member, learned a lot from both of them. I learned many lessons from Herman about the importance of dreaming, but dreaming and making those dreams a reality in a way that's consistent with your sense of morality and ethics. And from Don, I learned the importance of communications in a collegial fashion. He was a great colleague at Oaks College, and made it a pleasure to be there. So I think that the development of Oaks College is an example of how UC Santa Cruz can be an incubator for innovation. We take what can work and we run with it. So now we have an opportunity to hear from two people who've made a lasting contribution, men I'm honored to call friends. Well, please join me in welcoming Herman Blake and Don Rothman.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you all. This is very moving to see so many familiar faces, and I know Herman has been moved as well. I want to make sure that you know that I'm not channeling Mike Wallace tonight. I'm not trying to be an aggressive reporter. I'm a friend and colleague, and we're going to have a conversation for a little while between the two of us, and you're going to have to awaken your imaginations. The image that I had when we planned this, God help me, some of you will remember this movie in the 60s, Buñuel's Discreet Charm of the Bourgeoisie. Some of you are laughing because of the title, but some of you may remember the scene that I'm remembering, which is that a group of people are sitting down at a formal dinner, and they're eating, and then they discover when a curtain goes up that they're on a stage. And so I want you to imagine, I want you to enter this willing suspension of disbelief that you're eavesdropping for about a half an hour or so in a conversation. And then what we're hoping is that you will get the microphone, that you will be provoked in some way, you'll get impatient enough listening to us talk that you'll simply have to find your own voice. And that's exactly what a writing teacher is all about. So, but you'll have to be imaginative for a while and imagine you're both here and you're not here, which will turn out to be a major theme in what I'm going to begin by asking Herman to talk about. The idea of presence and invisibility, visibility and presence. And I'm going to start, if you'll let me, by reading a poem that has enormous resonance for me because Roberto Crespi, who was one of our founding colleagues in College 7 in Oaks, turned me on to this Bertolt Brecht poem many, many years ago, and it's accompanied me through my life. And it gives me an opportunity, as I've realized in a number of very long conversations with Herman, to begin our conversation. It's called A Worker Reads History. Who built the 7 gates of Thebes? The books are filled with names of kings. Was it the kings who called the craggy rocks of stone and Babylon so many times destroyed? Who built the city up each time? In which of Lima's houses, that city glittering with gold, lived those who built it? In the evening when the Chinese wall was finished, where did the masons go? Imperial Rome is full of arcs of triumph. Who reared them up, and over whom did the Caesars triumph? Byzantium lives in song. Were all her dwellings palaces? And even in Atlantis of the legend, the night the seas rushed in, the drowning men still bellowed for their slaves. Young Alexander conquered India, he alone. Caesar beat the Gauls. Was there not even a cook in his army? Philip of Spain wept as his fleet was sunk and destroyed. Were there no other tears? Frederick the Great triumphed in the 7 Years' War. Who triumphed with him? Each page of victory, at whose expense the victory ball? Every 10 years, a great man. Who paid the piper? So many particulars, so many questions. When I Herman and I started to talk. We started to talk a couple of months ago, and then a lot in the last week. One of my memories was how when I first came here, and I want to say I came as a 27-year-old to a campus that didn't yet embrace the need to teach writing. And I had many people bewildered by how anyone interested in Shakespeare could possibly choose to teach freshman composition. And I had a provost, my first boss, who came to me and said, "You must be learning so much about our students. Could you write about it? Could you write again? Could you come with me to this meeting in Chicago because the presidents of colleges need to hear what you're learning?" I can't tell you, and this is where I think the emotional reality of this is so powerful, that what could have turned out to be a very brief career in a research university where it was not understood why anyone would teach composition who was also intellectually and academically interested. Instead, what I had was someone asking me, "What are you learning? What are you learning that you think maybe the rest of us need to know?" And what I remember, and why I'm so grateful to have this chance to share the space with you and invite other people into this space, is how a whole career got shaped by your willingness to be curious and to ask those questions. And one of my early memories, and this I'm going to turn this over to you in a minute, is how you would begin meetings like this or in smaller sections. And you would say, before we begin, maybe we ought to be aware of the people who aren't here, but whose presence is felt. And the people who are here but haven't yet made their presence felt. That was a recurring part of my education as a teacher, as a person, as a young man. And I want to invite you to begin with that awareness that I heard 2 days ago in class with you, and I heard it over and over, repeatedly over the years we've known each other. Awareness of who isn't in the room, and awareness of who is in the room, but hasn't yet made that presence felt. And I want to invite you to, if you feel so inclined, to let us hear what you're thinking, and we'll move on from there.
Well, first of all, even though this is a conversation between you and me, I cannot deny that I feel the presence of a lot of people. And not only the presence of a lot of people, the presence of a lot of people who guided me. And I could go through this room and identify different people from whom I learned when I first arrived here. And when we were in the provost's house, I spoke to one person and told him what I learned from him that I still use. So I start by expressing my gratitude to all of the people who helped guide me even as we were guiding each other. Okay? Harry Berger and I used to try to get to the Cowell faculty room first because he said he could not stand my coffee. It was like black power. So there are others, okay? There are people who were students who taught me. So I'm grateful to everybody. But to get to your question, you know, one of the things I find about academics is they think and think and think and analyze and analyze and analyze, and sometimes it's just good to be. To just experience and take what you experience and use in some way without all of the thought and analysis. On the other hand, when you take what is or what has been, if you want to transfer it on to others, you've got to be more knowledgeable about what it is you're taking. So I would begin by saying, for me, it started in maybe a number of ways. First of all, with a mother who understood that she would never live the life her children could live, and probably never live as long. And she spoke to us in ways that said, these are values and ideas that will take you through these valleys and over these hills. That's one thing. And one thing about it was learning how to deal with our realities. And I don't want to go into that, it's not necessary. And one of the ways was doing well in school. And I began to go to the libraries in the community and elsewhere, and I read. And I don't remember everything I read, but I used to love biography and autobiography. Because in biography and autobiography, I began to encounter people who had experienced things that, like I was going to experience. So it became a way of testing, even when I didn't know. And one of those people I read about as a child was a slave. A slave who, as a young boy, was captured by others and taken away from his owner. And his owner wanted that slave back and negotiated with those captors to exchange that slave boy for a fine horse. And it always stuck with me. That man's life was only worth a horse. But that man ultimately transformed the slave communities, the South, through his scientific work. That was George Washington Carver. And I could never get over, this man was traded for a horse and ended up developing ways to enrich the soils so that everybody could live better lives. And everywhere I went, I often talked and wrote about how a man who was traded for a horse became a scholar and a scientist. And that for me was a model. But I would have never had that model had I never had that mother. And I will never turn away from that mother or a woman of any background who reaches out and nurtures other people, young, old, siblings, whatever, that nurture. Now, I understand that more and more as I get older, but the presence of George Washington Carver and of my mother were always with me.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I remember yesterday in the class that I came to you with, you talked about Esau Jenkins, and you told a story about him. And it was a story about him learning to hold a pencil for the first time after spending a lifetime holding a hoe. And then later in the day, you got to see him lead a meeting. And he was absolutely gifted and brilliant at drawing out leadership from other people. And anyone who knows you knows that your pedagogy, your way of teaching, is so deeply embedded in storytelling that I want to encourage you to say some more about that. My first encounter with you was you were talking about how kids in Dofusky learn something about snakes. And you told, and you pointed to stories. But you have, narrative is such an essential part of who you are as an educator. And I'm wondering if you can reflect on what you, from your perspective, the strengths of that are, and also what the limitations are.
Well, let me mention Esau Jenkins, because people probably don't know his name. But, and it starts with, if you will, Carl Cherrenson, who was heading up the University Extension here.
It's the Dean of Extension.
And in my first year, at the end of my first year in Santa Cruz, I'm sitting in my office, 209 Cal, and this man walks in, Carl Cherrenson, and tells me what he was doing with the Emil Schwarzkopf Foundation. And I do tell stories, but I don't want to get so long that we don't get to the principles, okay, the key ideas. But I do have to say the connections always go further than you ever thought. And it didn't start with me and Esau. It started with Carl Cherrenson, who knew Esau, and then Carl Cherrenson was seeking somebody to do an evaluation of Esau's work and thought he'd get this black sociologist, and walked into my office not knowing that Esau Jenkins virtually lived with my family in South Carolina. So they hired me to go to South Carolina to write a report on Esau Jenkins. And when I got there and they learned, my uncle said, yeah, it's like fox throwing Brer Rabbit in the briar patch. But Esau Jenkins was going to the Citizenship Education School trying to learn how to write his name, which was really how to draw his name. And he never held anything smaller than a hoe in his hand. And watching him there trying to figure out how to hold that little pencil. And then when he finally figured out how to hold the pencil, it took 2 hours for him to learn how to put the pencil to the paper without driving it through the paper. This was a man who didn't know, who had no knowledge. I could write. I could make the paperwork. And then later I went to a community meeting and Esau Jenkins was leading the meeting. And he was trying to get people engaged. And he stood there and led that meeting, and he took people who were reluctant, enthusiastic, whatever, and he managed them as effectively as anybody you would ever want to see. And what he was teaching me was how to communicate, interact, and work with people who may not know how to write, but they know how to think and they know how to solve their problems. And you have to learn how to listen to them. Listen to them in such a way that they have confidence and respect for you for listening to them. So that became an important part of building them. Now, in this community that you're talking about, the island,
I'm going to reach over to make sure your microphone belongs where it belongs, because I don't want to lose this.
thank you.
Go ahead. Sorry.
All right. In this island, and many of you have been there, George has been there. I remember me and George and others walking down that long road, and we came across this man who was scrunching a squirrel. It means nothing to you, but your chancellor knows how to scrunch a squirrel. Now, I'm going to tell you something. You don't want to know how to scrunch a squirrel. So never ask him. But the snakes in this community, they get very large. I think at one point here I had a rattlesnake skin that was over 6 feet long, and it was about that wide when we killed it. And we do 2 or 3 a year, that size. And nobody had ever been bitten by a rattlesnake in this community. Yeah. Nobody. Yeah. No child. And you say, how do you teach your children about snakes and gators and, there's Hal Hyde. Hey, Hal. How do you teach them about dangerous animals? And this is a good example of my ignorance. Yeah. I didn't know. And so, being a sociologist who had studied socialization, I went in with my questions, about toilet training and all of this stuff, socialization. And I asked, how do you teach them about dangerous animals, and they never answered. They'd say, just so. Just so. And I remember the first time I wrote a report on Esau Jenkins and the community and everything. I wrote, there are no unique patterns of socialization. I wrote it. And I submitted it. I'm a scholar. I got a PhD. No unique patterns of socialization. But ain't nobody bit by a snake. Then later on, I'm in the community with Bob Cresby and Alan Fields. And the men got to telling stories. Everybody tells stories, And this one old guy was talking about how you kill a snake. How if you meet a rattlesnake, how you get a snake in a coil, and you keep it in a coil while you go get a stick to kill it. He gave the whole story. And Bob said to me, because we were sitting around with the other men, Bob said, but he's looking at the children. He's telling this story, and he's looking at the children. Bob pointed this out. And he said, I was no bigger than Johnny over there. So he and Johnny connected, and Johnny's learning. Okay? And later on, Johnny or some other child moved into another room, and he moved over to the door and kept telling stories. These are lots of stories. But what I'm saying is the eye contact and the effective communication was between the generations, not with the men sitting around. And I wrote, there's no unique pattern of, no special pattern of socialization. It was my ignorance that took me away from knowledge. And it was sitting and following serendipitous moments with colleagues that led me to insights. And I think the point, it comes to Miles Horton, whom we brought here. We used to call him the hillbilly Socrates. And Miles used to say to me, Miles could communicate with anybody.
Yeah.
But the one thing Miles did was he listened. He listened, and he would sometimes not say anything for hours. And you might not say anything, but he wasn't saying anything. Here go the microphone. Thank you. You weren't saying anything, he wasn't saying anything. But then you might say something. Out in the community, he'd do this. And what Miles said was, every person has something unique about himself or herself. Something that they are passionate about, they feel strongly about, that nobody else knows. It has nothing to do with education or whatever. It has a lot to do with who they are and what they've experienced. And when I can learn what it is that is at the center of your being, and I can connect with the center of my being, we'll be connecting. And he had me understand that you couldn't even go and ask sometimes what's at the center of your being. You just have to listen or watch. I don't know what that means.
You're bringing up two people's names I want to just say something about because they're extremely important to me, but I wouldn't have met them if it hadn't been for you. Carl Sharonson called me into his office one day, 1976, and said, have you ever heard of the Bay Area Writing Project?
Oh, really?
He said, I said, yeah, I read about an article about them in Chronicle. And he said, well, we're thinking about, he had talked to you, and that's how he got to me. And he said, well, we're thinking about whether the university here, UCSC, should play a role in K-12 education, maybe around improving the teaching of writing. And he said, we thought maybe you'd be interested. And I said, well, if I did it, anything like this, it would have to be very different from the university telling teachers what to do. Because I actually think that that's not a way of improving education. I think we need to create something like a think tank around literacy education. And he looked at me, and I said, so if that's not what you're interested in, just let me know. And he looked at me and he said, "Why do you think I'm asking you?" Then you mentioned Miles Horton. I remember when Miles Horton came to Santa Cruz, we were going through a hard time at Oaks College trying to figure out how we were going to survive, whether we were underappreciated, maybe even being used for certain purposes in the system, but not being appreciated on campus. And I remember asking Miles here, and after that I went to Highlander. And I said to him, "Do you think it's possible within a university like this to bring about the kind of radical change that many of us at Oaks wanted to see?" And he said, "Well, I made the decision not to try in that way, and that's why I created the Highlander Center."
Yep.
And I think he also said, "But they found us and burned us down."
That's right.
And I think that for me, what I hear you saying about, and I know this is a Langston Hughes expression, articulate listening, which is the first time I ever heard that was from you. I heard it again yesterday in class. That articulate listening is so vital and so important if one is teaching writing. To assume that the person in front of you has knowledge, knows something, brings to this campus knowledge about a culture, about a family, about a person. Go ahead.
No, I'm not.
Yeah, you could. Go.
First of all, there's what we say and then there's what we hear. And we have to try to figure out how we build links between what we say and what we hear. I have never used the phrase articulate listening.
Yeah.
Never.
I wrote it down.
That's what you heard. Langston Hughes, from whom I got it, in the simple stories always say it's listen eloquently.
Oh, let me write that down.
But my point is well taken, in the sense that you're coming from your strength.
Yeah.
And I'm coming from my strength. And whether it's articulate or eloquent, it's effective listening.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's the important point. Now let me get back to Miles.
Yes.
Because Miles was that way. But Miles, in many respects, learned some of that from Septima Clark, who was at the center of the citizenship education school. She was teaching Esau how to write. And she was in a setting where people could not teach literacy to adult blacks. They would come in the county school system and try to offer literacy classes and always fail because they brought these Scott Forsman readers. And people didn't want to read about Spot, see Spot, rock. Septima Clark did something very simple. And I'm going on, but I hope you'll appreciate this. Septima Clark said, "What do you want to read? What do you want to read?" They wanted to read the Bible. They wanted to read the insurance policy because Policy Brown came through every week and collected a nickel for the policy. They didn't know what was on the table. And they wanted to read the Sears Roebuck catalog. So when what they wanted to read became the curriculum, the people learned to read. Now, I want to carry that just a little bit further because it's an incredible story. Because a book probably considered the definitive biography of Septima Clark was just published. It's called Freedom's Teacher. You understand, Septima Clark became an important part of Martin Luther King's Southern Leadership Conference, and through her citizenship schools, taught hundreds of thousands of illiterate blacks to read and write so that they could register. And they became the backbone of that whole operation. So this is not a small thing. And she'd done all of that, and we invited her to Oaks College, and she came for 2 month periods. Well, I got this biography of Septima Clark, and I want to see about her experiences at Oaks College in California. There is not one line. Now, I'm not saying the biographer was wrong, but the biographer chose to not include whatever may have been there, because in the book on page 174 is a picture of Septima Clark standing on the campus of the University of California, Santa Cruz, talking to Santa Cruz students.
Wow.
But you have no idea how she got here or why she was here, nothing. Wow. But I want to tell you something. When Septima Clark came here, having taught us how to listen, taught us how to listen to the people who were underrepresented, if you will. I was dealing with the Black Panther Party, okay? And David Hill, and I was working in a variety of ways, and David Hilliard, who at that time, who used to be chief of staff, was in prison up in Vacaville. Mm-hmm. And through various people, David Hilliard heard about Septima Clark, the daughter of a slave. And we, through lawyers, got Septima invited to address the inmates at Vacaville. This is the story that's in no book. Wow. And I remember driving with Sabre Slaughter up to Vacaville for Septima Clark to address these inmates. And it goes back to talking about they burned down Highlander. Mm-hmm. So we're on our way up there. Sabre's driving. I'm sitting in the front, and Septima's in the back, and she's saying, you know, she's got to tell those men that God loves them. I said, Lord, Seppi, you going up here with these Black Panthers and all these other guys, and you ain't gonna go in there telling them Lord love them. No, they ain't gonna hear that. That's my interpretation.
Yeah.
This is what I'm hearing.
Yeah.
But we turn on and we driving, and finally she says, you know, this is Good Friday. And it was Good Friday. And she says, I have to tell them that God loves them. I'm about to, come on, lady. Don't do it. So we go in there, and here's about 200 inmates sitting in the chapel. And they introduced Septima Clark, daughter of a slave, and she was. And she went up there. A lot of things were going on, and I won't tell all about it, but she went up there to speak, and she was this little old lady, and these two guys stood next to her like guards. And here they were up there, and she was here. I'm thinking, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it. You know what Septima did? She said, you know, I used to be at Highlander Folk School. We had Miles Horton and so forth. And you know, one day the police raided us. I said, good, don't tell them God love them. She said, one day the police raided us. And they came in there, and they grabbed my arm, and they twisted my arm up, and they put my arm on back, and I think they were trying to do that hammerlock thing. Do you all know anything about that? And then they take me down to the station, and they made me do that fingerprint thing. You all know anything about that? And she ended up by saying, I'm in jail. I had the hammerlock, and I had the fingerprint, and I didn't do nothing wrong. And she said, I bet you a lot of y'all in here, and you ain't done nothing wrong. So I'm here to tell you that God loves you. And when it was over, the men were weeping. They were weeping because they were thinking about mothers and others who said God loved you. And what Septima Clark taught me, that Miles Horton taught, that we try to do in Oaks, is you just don't simply come and lay your burden on somebody else. You try to hear the burden they're carrying, and you tote it together. And that's about the learning, the listening eloquently, articulately, communicating, and respecting. And so I don't know what that has. I don't know what it has to do with all of this. But, you know, I got this book, and it's the best biography written on Septima Clark, and somebody's talking about making it a movie, and they don't even know. Hey, Lyle. They don't even know. And they ignore this. Maybe it's not important.
Yeah.
But when we start dealing with our students and we start reaching out to them, we have to listen to the paths they have trod, as well as understand the dreams that they are dreaming and challenge them in such a manner they can build in ways that we could never imagine. Septima taught me, Miles taught me, my mama taught me, George Washington Carver taught me, and you taught me. And I'm glad I'm still learning.
I want to ask, I know you've mentioned people whose presence, either felt or physical presence, really kept you going and kept you struggling. And wondering who else you peopled your spirit with when, specifically around trying a difficult experiment in higher education. It wasn't easy to conceive of Oaks College to begin with. You didn't do it alone. I know you're very generous and always saying that. And I'm wondering who you drew on when things looked pretty bleak and disappointing.
Let me say a different word about it.
Yeah.
I'll come to that.
Okay.
I talked about George Washington Carver and how much he impacted me. I ended up, near the end of my career, I retired from Iowa State University. And when I got to Iowa State University, I realized I was at the college where George Washington Carver went to school. He got his bachelor's degree there, he got his master's degree there, and he taught there on the faculty until he was recruited by Booker T. Washington to Tuskegee. I'm coming back to your point. And I taught in a building named after George Washington Carver. And my office was in that building, and there was a statue of George Washington Carver outside that building. So every time I would go into the building, I'd stop and I'd visit with Dr. Carver. Students would be with me sometimes. I'd say, well, we got to stop and visit with Dr. Carver. And they'd look at me like, you know, okay. But my expectations of them as students were drawn from the experience of George Washington Carver. I said, you know, these are my expectations. And they'd always come, well, it's too hard. I said, you cannot walk in the shadow of George Washington Carver and say something is too hard. You just can't do it. But Carver was a botanist. And I'd look at that statue, and he always had a flower in his lapel. Always a flower in his lapel. And I began to follow George Washington Carver, my model. And I started there a practice of never standing before a class, never without a fresh rose in my lapel. Never. And it wasn't one I used yesterday, or it wasn't one that was paper or cloth. I always went to the florist and I got a fresh rose. And now that I'm teaching at the Medical University of South Carolina, I never stand before a class without a fresh rose.
That's beautiful.
So I come tonight with my boutonniere.
Yeah, I see.
And I got a white rose in tribute to all of those who've gone before, including Roberto Crespi, Rafael Guzman, Josie King, Alan Fields, Juventino Espasa, Katia Panas, Dean McHenry, Angus Taylor, and so many others. Because the spirit of their sacrifice doesn't only motivate me, it drives me. And then I have the red rose in tribute to those who still walk these paths and are still coming along, like Cameron Van Der Schaaf or Patrick Walker or Gregory Christopher Brown. And Chris and I used to jog around this campus. I would advise Chris as well as cuss him out while we were jogging. And I'd be going up the hill like this, and Chris would be going around me like this. And the other day, I ran into a student here, one of Bill Dickinson's students. And the minute I met the young man, he wouldn't stop talking about his problems. He would not stop talking. I couldn't get to the other students because dealing with his problems. So I got him to write me an email. And in that email, I said to him, my response, well, you need to talk to Gregory Christopher Brown. And I copied Gregory Christopher Brown, and I'm putting Gregory Christopher Brown in touch with this young man because Chris Brown got a better answer for him than I do. So you're constantly drawing all of these. So when you ask me, who do I think about? I think about a world, a community of 2 or 3 people or 2,000 or 3,000 people. But I seek in all of this to try and understand how you can build bridges. Build bridges. I've done community development work in Europe, Asia, Latin America, Indian communities, and other communities that many of these young people know. Julie Chang, when she went over to Monterey Park Track, and she was trying to help them understand how Chinese people get their names. I remember you told me. And others. And what I'm trying to say is, you know, you can pick out people. You can pick out names. And you can get role models. But ultimately, every single human soul has the quality of a role model. Look at Victor Potter. Stand up, Victor. Sit down.
The curtain, the curtain has just come up. Now you're really here.
Victor Potter comes here with his wife and his son and his daughters, and we bind and we cry. We bind and we cry. You got there 5 role models, however young or however old. And throughout here, you got hundreds of them. So, you know, I don't think about people. I do and I don't. I just be.
Yeah.
So you tell me who I'm thinking about.
Yeah. One of the things, I'm going to ask you one more question. Then, because some of you emailed us questions, and some of you are probably being provoked to raise your voices at this point, I hope. I'm going to just ask Herman one more, and then I'm going to turn to a few that were emailed, and then turn this over and get the microphone out where it needs to be right now. Is that okay with you?
It would have been okay fine? 30 minutes ago.
Yeah, I thought you were going to say that. Yeah, but, you know, okay. One of the things that I've been thinking a lot about is that when people tell the story of Oaks College, they often neglect the commitment right from the beginning to giving students who had come from under-resourced high schools and women a chance to study science. We both find ourselves now, I'm retired, but I'm still working with minority science students on campus, helping them with writing. And you have this amazing position as humanist in residence at the Medical University of South Carolina. Talk about crossing boundaries. Think about what it would be like for someone to offer you a position as humanist in residence. I don't know if that's your real title, but that's what I like to think. You know, I've already proven my inability to remember exact words. What about that? What about the fact that we both have held on for all these years to this boundary crossing in a lot of ways, you know?
Well, you know, I just feel very strongly, and this was Rafael Guzman. Rafael Guzman so strongly joined in the message that we cannot build our communities, support our communities, and face our future without the range of knowledge and understanding that makes it possible to do it all. And, you know, we would therefore not limit ourselves to the social sciences and the humanities. We had to be aggressive and assertive about the sciences. Raphael felt it very passionately, as did I, and we had reasons for it that go into not being from that. He's a political scientist, I'm a sociologist. And so we went for that passion. Bill Doyle suggested ways we could do it. And ultimately, George Blumenthal, Bill Doyle, Chuck Carr as a campus architect, Ron Softly, Bob Basler, and myself went and studied other places and situations and brought back these ideas. And we challenged our students, we recruited scientists as well as humanists and social scientists, and the students flourished, and I think we made some inroads, and there are people around doing good things who perhaps might not have done it had we not done that. I take no credit for it, I have to say. It was all of these people. Now I find myself in an academic health center, a freestanding academic health center that has 13,000 employees. We have a College of Medicine, College of Dentistry, College of Pharmacy, Nursing, Public Health, Graduate School, and we do all of this, a lot of research and a lot of clinical care. I think the last time I counted, there were 5 hospitals, and all of this. What I find, and I was offered the job. I never applied for it, never even thought it was for me, but the vice president came and walked into my office at the University of South Carolina when I was there, after retiring from Iowa State, and said he had got the trustees of the university to approve this position, and it was going to be the first time they would have somebody teaching or engaging in the humanities, and he wanted me to be that person. Now, why? I have no idea.
I think most of us do.
But at any rate, I took it, and my responsibility is to introduce the humanities. And what I do there is what I do here. Yeah. I tell stories. And I try to let them get me into places where I tell stories. I have lunch with a lot of doctors. I like to call it the humanities free lunch program, you know. And they invite me to lecture to all of the, I teach all of the entering medical students and all of the dental students. But what I try to do is to expand their sensitivity to the broad human community that surrounds them and that they serve or do not serve. Because there's a growing Latino population that isn't being addressed. And I don't think that's right. But anyhow, that's what I do. I do the humanities to people who are giving health care. Now, the one thing I will say is the number of people interested in that is simply extraordinary. And they support me unequivocally. They encourage me even when they can't participate because of what they have to do. And I've just completed an article which is going to be published in the Journal of Thoracic Surgery. And it's co-written with one of the world's leading thoracic surgeons, who sees what I have, who sees what he has, and says, let's get together and work this out. Well, you see then that leads to another thing and another thing, and you continue to do that. You never know when and where it's going to work out or how it's going to work out. And you've got to have the courage, the faith, and the determination to forge ahead. My mother lies in her grave, died at the age of 54, had a stroke at 57 and died at 54. But my mother will never die. And I work in the stroke belt of the United States. And I'm getting doctors and communities to address issues of stroke. So that's what I do, and having a pretty good time.
All right. I'm going to make a transition here, since obviously the willing suspension of disbelief, you've succeeded in pretending that you're not here. Lee Duffus asks, having spent a week on campus with students, faculty, some staff, what's the most significant or distinctive changes at UCSC that you've noticed this week? Did these surprise you?
Well, what surprises me, first of all, is how invulnerable these students think they are. I mean, you can't drive around here when the students are here. They step out and go everywhere. They ride their bicycles, It's like, oh, you a car, that's all right. But what strikes me, what moves me, is how diverse the student body is now. And how many people I see here that I never saw before. Yeah. Now, what troubles me, and I say this very reluctantly, but I'm glad for the opportunity to express it, is how many students I've met who haven't been challenged to reach beyond their racial or ethnic identities out. Mm-hmm. And I think they come with a passion to understand themselves. And in the process of seeking to understand themselves, I worry that they're not being challenged to understand others in a broader range, as well as yourselves.
I'm going to follow up with Louis Campos's, and then I'm going to let you take the microphone. So whoever's going to do that, appreciate it. This is from Louis Campos, who says, Herman, when I was one of your students, you and Ralph Guzman were leading social science visionaries. Can you elaborate on whether your vision met your expectation in terms of how you find society today?
I would say that what I've seen at UC Santa Cruz, I can't say society today. I live in an extremely racist state. But I would have to say that Ralph and I, if Ralph were here, we would be hugging and crying, saying, look, man, what we did. We didn't do it, but look what we dreamed. And look what's here. Alma, where's Alma? There's Alma. Alma was an undergraduate here, almost inarticulate. And she would come into Ralph's office and sit for hours. And there was a communication going on. But Alma had nobody else to turn to. Because it was Ralph and Alma. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
And here she is, and if she were a student now, there'd be dozens upon dozens, faculty, staff, and administrators. They were there then. They had the sensitivity, but we hadn't broken that down. Mm-hmm. So I would have to say our dream, we would be crying. Mm-hmm. And he would, if Ralph saw Alma today, I think he would just melt. Please forgive me. I'm not trying to embarrass you. I'm just talking about what I know or feel. And so, even though I'm critical in some respects, It's been there. And Louis Campos would know, because Louis was one of those early students, a little bit older than the others. But I have to say, Louis always acted in a manner like he trusted us. Not really sure that this is going to happen, but if you say we're going that way, I'm going to trust you. And every time I've come back, I run into him in one form or the other, and I'm always glad for the fact that he trusted us.
I'm going to turn this over to anyone who would like to say something. You want to deliver the microphone over there? Please raise your hand so she can see you. Yeah, it's the lip.
I'm Dilip Basu, and I'm here to pay my respect and homage to Herman Blake, also to Don Rothman, and just to remind you both how I connected the two of you. I was at first at Stevenson College as acting assistant professor. Then the history department decided to keep me. And in those days, every new appointee went to the newest college. At Merrill College, the provost wanted me as an international third world person. Herman and Ralph came forward and said, "Won't you join us at College 7?" And hugged me. Herman hugged me and called me, "You are my black brother." And I said, "Of course, I'll join you." In my educational experience in this country as a graduate student at Harvard, then at Berkeley, I met many African students, but I never met an Afro-American graduate student. And Don used to teach writing at Merritt College. And after I joined College 7, I realized that among the many underprivileged students that Ralph and Herman had brought to College 7, they had serious writing problems. As a matter of fact, Herman and I taught a class together for 2 years.
Go ahead, teach.
And that was also an eye-opener. And because of Herman, many Afro-American students joined that class called the role of violence and nonviolence in decolonization. Students read the biography of Gandhi, Mao, Ho Chi Minh, and Martin Luther King. And students from those 2 years still email me from time to time, and also Herman, who had a wonderful educational experience that was. So I told Herman that, look, it's a very exciting experience for me to be in this college, but I also see the problem. The problem is, among other things, writing and also science learning. And Herman said, you know, UC rules do not allow teaching of writing, because UC acknowledges that every high school student would know how to read and write. But that was not indeed the case. So Herman had to go to, I think, to the UC Regents or somewhere to get an approval to hire a writing instructor. Then he turned to me and said, "Where will you find a writing instructor? Find one for me." So I recommended Don Rothman. Thank you. Who was teaching writing.
Rebecca Garcia, class of 1982. I never had the pleasure of meeting you, Herman, but I did participate with Don in terms of the writing project and learned about the need for our students to develop their voices. But I don't know if I listened eloquently, but I'm wondering, what I heard from you, Herman, was that you said that one of the challenges that we need is that we are not challenging our students to go beyond their racial identity, is what I think I heard. I am currently volunteering and tutoring students from Cabrillo Community College, undocumented students from community college, in their scholarship applications and helping them write their essays. And just on Monday, I met with one of my students, and her fear of transferring is, she says, I grew up in Aromas. I grew up in schools where it's primarily Latino. And so she says, I'm afraid to leave this area to go to a school where it's not primarily Latino. And so how do I challenge her in terms of going beyond her racial identity?
Where's Valerie? Valerie, there you are. Valerie, you know, I learned so much from many of the people here, and I could almost tell you exactly what I learned at what point. I listened articulately.
Eloquently.
Okay.
I can learn, I can.
And Valerie was one of the instructors with us in the core course in Oaks. And we used to gather, we had about 6 or 7 faculty. And we had a variety of readings, which I thought were good and important. Valerie taught me that in many of those readings, we were not only teaching students about experiences, we were helping them grow in ways that I didn't understand. I remember when she said it. And coming back to your point, in many of the places I've been since I left here, particularly in Mississippi, I have tried to use biographies and autobiographies to help young people cope with their circumstances, even when I can't give them advice and counsel, or they won't listen to me. And I can't tell you how to do what you do, or how to do what you might want to do, but I'm sure there are writings, articles, and things that would help them understand. Now, I don't simply ask them to read. I ask them to write critical and analytical responses in the way that Don taught me. And believe me, Don Rothman had Latino and black students studying Shakespearean tragedy. And they were going beyond where they were. Now, I can't say all of the details because I don't know all of your story and all of that situation. But there are ways in which, if you listen and take one role model, the minute I see one that happens, that one becomes a member of my staff. In more times, I have hired people. When I didn't have any money, when I was at Iowa State, the dean walked into my office and said, "You've overspent your budget." I looked at the dean, I said, I've been a president, I've been a dean, I've been where you are, and my job is to make the bills and your job is to pay them. He looked at me like I was crazy, but we began to do retention in such a manner that he paid those bills. Now, I'm not saying you do that. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying there are ways of making connections with those young people as you listen to them and get them to write and do other kinds of things, to get them to think about expanding beyond those things. I wish I had a simple answer, but I suspect the answer lies in the experience of everybody else. I'll tell you this. When I was teaching at Iowa State University, in the spirit which Valerie helped me understand, what they call white women. I don't like to use these terminologies anymore. Those Iowa rural women would read Myrlie Evers Williams' book, Watch Me Fly, and they would be turned on like a light bulb. Because Myrlie Evers Williams saw her husband murdered in her driveway, and she had to reinvent herself, re-educate herself, and lead her children out of that morass. And many of those women found themselves in situations where they had to take charge of their lives and lead their children out. And Myrlie Evers Williams became the role model. It was in the book that they found meaning. I don't have an answer. Books have been a salvation for me.
Too late, Chris. I have the microphone. Hi, Don. It's Leilani Ferrari, class of '84. Hi, Herman. I came to tell you thank you for saving my life many times when I was a young student here. I am honored to be in your presence once again. My question would be, my 15-year-old son, Tiger, is now a sophomore at Kennedy High School in Sacramento. And I'm trying to find ways to inspire him to go to college like his sister, who's at the CSU Monterey Bay. And he is challenging me. And although he's doing better in school now, I'm trying to find ways to inspire him like you inspired me. And it's a little difficult now being a single mom. But maybe you could give me some insight on, there's no classes or programs like we had when I came here to take young students when they're in high school, inexpensive for single moms like me, ways to get them inspired up here on the campus. It's not as financially, they don't see the light, basically. How they're going to be able to make it through college, like I did, when they think it's so far outreaching that they'll never get a job to pay for the debt that they're going to incur.
I'm sorry. I hope you'll forgive me for leaning on books and writing, but that's what I know. And there's a whole series of books called Souls Looking Back. Souls Looking Back. It's about 5 volumes, and it's all multiple stories about young people who've come through the valley, and they're looking back and tell their stories. And one volume deals with African Americans, one with Native Americans, one with Asian Americans. They got all of them. And so there are models there. Now, I'd say one more point about it, because I did it with my own children. I got one daughter here, my beautiful daughter, Audris, who's sitting here. And my beautiful son, Lyle, who's cool back there, the tango dancer. But their older sister, when she was a child, I hired her because I was trying to motivate young people, and I wanted her to read all this material. So I hired her to read and summarize this material so I would know which ones to use. And I educated my daughter, and I got her in that way. Let me finish it this way. In Mississippi, when I was teaching there, and I had Oscar Porter and Ron Softly were there, we had a young man who wanted to play football in Mississippi, and he wanted to bulk up to play football. And we said in our class we'd make him the expert on Ralph Bunche. Never forget when we asked him that, gave him that, who's Ralph Bunche? and I think Ron or Oscar said, don't invite him to lunch. But that young man became the expert in our class on Ralph Bunche. The last I heard, he was teaching physics at Alcorn State University.
I want to say something. A few months ago, I was invited to a middle school in Santa Cruz to just talk about writing. And I decided to be really honest and to read a passage from my journal that I had just written the day before about what I called liminal space, my coffee shop. That place where you're not exactly strangers, but you're not exactly friends. And I took a risk. I thought adolescents in the middle school are going to understand whether they've never heard the word liminal, but they're going to understand that middle space. So I read my journal, and those kids just dove in. And I asked them to please write back to me. And then about 3 weeks later, I got 25 letters. Half of them said, I use the word liminal now every time I can. Now, I think that's progress, because it got them excited about a word that actually fit their experience, that middle space that kids in middle school and adolescents really know. And they knew that I was as excited as they were about that word. So they need to, that's part of my answer, you know.
We don't have answers, but we got answers, and you got an answer.
Yeah, right, you got answers.
Get
We have
Victor. Get Victor.
Yeah, of course. Or have them write. Yeah, have them write.
Professor Blake, you honored me just by speaking my name tonight. And 34 years ago, this man saved my life. I broke into the Santa Cruz Bay Tree bookstore on a despondent night. And Professor Blake took jurisdiction over that matter. The Santa Cruz Police Department, I had been fingerprinted, I had been photographed, and they put him on the phone, and he says, Victor, they are going to be taking you back to Oaks College. I want you to come and see me tomorrow. And the next day, when I went to Professor Blake's room, he said, I want this to be put behind you. I want you to concentrate on your studies and to make something of yourself. Perhaps within a month or two of that conversation, I packed up my bags and left and did not even say goodbye to Professor Blake, much less say thank you. And it was, I believe it was ordained by God for me tonight to be here and to present my family to you and to thank you. I won't take up the time because I'd like other people to address you, but within the books that you have, I think you will see something. You know, when you granted my freedom that night and totally wiped it from my record, you didn't even get a horse in return.
I got a community. I got a community.
But I hope want you to know that in that you've touched my life, and through it I touched many others. I want you to read about it. I will correspond with you. I thank God once again to be able to stand here in front of everyone and say, thank you, Professor Blake. I love you, and you mean the world to me. And I appreciate this moment just to say that.
I would just like to tell a short story before I ask my question. Herman and Don are both very important men in my life. They're my role models. I came to UC Santa Cruz from Watts. I was born of a 13-year-old mother to a 13-year-old mother. And I babysat Don's kids.
You should. They love you.
So we really go way back. Herman and I used to run, and I mean, one of my funniest experiences is Herman had taken off before me one morning, and he was at the west gate, and I was probably at the entrance of the west parking lot, and Herman's running, and all of a sudden he go, wow! I mean, just like out of the blue, like, dang, like a deer, you know? It's like, wow, Santa Cruz really got into him. And then I get to that spot where Herman was, and it was a dead snake. I mean, it was the thing wasn't even alive, and Herman must have caught it out of the corner of his eye and, you know, reacted, right? Like, okay, so we laughed about that. But Don taught me how to write, and I used to always want to write like PhDs should write, have everything ready and good to go, the first drafting. The most important lesson Don taught me is the best writers are rewriters. And the second thing was, you have to use your voice, Chris. You can't talk like me or be me or do any of that. And Herman, I scared him a lot, because I was a roughneck kid from Watson. I was 18, but I knew more than most people because I never had a childhood. So, I used to try to compete with Herman. I knew I couldn't do it intellectually, but, I had other things I could contribute. But I really love these gentlemen. They made me realize that I could succeed. Today I'm a college professor at Cal State Fullerton, and these gentlemen had a lot to do with that. I'd just like to have my wife stand up.
Yes, Nora.
Nora and I have been together for 32 years, and this is my Oaks College sweetheart, Nora Brown. So, I got a lot of good things from you at UCSC, but my question was,
We only have about. We only have.
Professor, did you give us the mic, and we don't want to stop talking. Do you think the financial crisis in the state can endanger the Oaks' multicultural, multi-ethnic, interdisciplinary spirit? Will people of color virtually disappear from UCSC because of financial reasons?
I'm listening eloquently. The financial crisis is very critical, and I can't give an answer to your question because I simply don't know. And I would be less than candid if I tried to shape it. I think in your question, you gave your answer. And a lot of others can give answers. And those of us who have the opportunity need to figure out a way we can touch the lives of these young people so that they can continue on.
Thank you. I'm going to have to, I know, I'm really sorry, but I think we'll hang around afterwards. I began with a Brecht poem. I want to end with a few stanzas from another Brecht poem, and then we'll see where we go from there, but I think I need to abide by the directions here. This is a poem. I'm not going to read the whole thing. It's called Song of the Good People. It's another poem that I have found very useful in my life. And I'm just going to read the last couple of stanzas. This is the song about good people. They know how to give reasons for their presence. If they find them thrown away, they laugh. But here, too, they are reliable, in that unless we rely on ourselves, they cannot be relied on. When they make mistakes, we laugh. For if they lay a stone in the wrong place, we, by watching them, see the right place. Daily they earn our interest, even as they earn their daily bread. They are interested in something that is outside themselves. The good people keep us busy. They don't seem to be able to finish anything by themselves. All their solutions still contain problems. At dangerous moments on sinking ships, suddenly we see their eyes full on us. Though they do not entirely approve of us as we are, they are in agreement with us nonetheless. Thank you.
Well, wow. Thank you, Herman. Thank you, Don. I think we all learned a little bit tonight about what UC Santa Cruz is all about. It was wonderful to have two great minds in conversation. And I think we all learned a little bit about how to inspire others. I want to thank all of you for coming here and listening so eloquently. Many of you will be here tomorrow, and I look forward to seeing you either at the lunch at Cull College, or I want to remind you of another opportunity to listen eloquently at our academic forum tomorrow in this room with Elliot Aronson, Manny Aries, Bettina Aptecker, Gabe Elkheim, and Kate Edmonds. I hope you'll be able to attend, and I look forward to seeing you there. Thank you very much.